Hello and happy day. I hope you're having a really good one. My name is Jenna Poole. I'm a clinical nutritionist, and my main area that I focus on is on gut health and hormonal wealth. So today's video is all about dairy, and in particular why you may be getting some symptoms like bloating or diarrhea and pain after you've consumed it. So often what happens is a client will come into my office and they'll be getting diarrhea or constipation or bloating, but there's no pattern around it. And this is what I love, is finding the patterns within your symptoms. So ultimately, I suppose why we want to be symptom free is so that we can live our life, right? We can have I remember being in so much gut pain that I had no brain space to even think about what I would like to enjoy in my life or what I would like to be doing. And I just remember feeling so uncomfortable and in so much pain that it just wasn't an enjoyable way of living. And so that really spurred me on to help other people, is to be symptom free so that you can go and live your life and enjoy it pain free and without worrying about bloating or whether your pants are going to fit at the end of the day, or whether, are you doing is a fart really going to be a fart? We really want to assess food intolerances and why your gut is so reactive to certain foods. And when you might not find a pattern, that's where I come into play, and I can really look at what you're eating and find a particular pattern and why you're reacting. I'm actually a firm believer that if you have a food intolerance now, that does not mean you necessarily have to have it for the rest of your life. I myself have healed both my own gut and the guts of clients to then be able to incorporate different foods into their diet back again. So things like onion and garlic and beetroot and gluten and a little bit of dairy as well. And that needs to become into an informed decision and really being able to look at, is that food healthy for me now? And where am I at? So getting back to the dairy aspect of that, is that dairy in itself is a really healthy food. It's got beautiful fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Vitamin D is actually a hormone, so that's important to know, fun fact. And it also has a really good amount of fat in the milk if you don't get fat-free, which I don't recommend. The fat in the product helps those fat-soluble vitamins to be absorbed and utilized by the body. And as a whole product, dairy actually also should consume things like enzymes and probiotics in order to help the body to process it and be absorbed. Now, it also does contain calcium. However, here's the caveat. Just because it contains a lot of calcium does not mean that that calcium is in an absorbable form. So when you're looking at nutrients, they need to be what's called bioavailable, and that means available to the body. Yeah, so the body can actually recognize it, utilize it, and then absorb it and create other things from it. So just because it contains calcium does not mean that that calcium is in a form that your body can absorb. I hope that makes sense. So what happens here in Australia anyway is that there are regulations around pasteurisation and homogenization, which essentially, pasteurization is where they heat the milk up to a certain temperature to kill off any bacteria. And this is because in history, when milk and dairy cows weren't clean, there weren't very many hygienic principles or practices that were used around milking cows. Bacteria could get into the milk and make those who consumed it quite sick, and you couldn't even die. So it is quite serious. Our regulations now are so tight that it's it has to be much cleaner. If you're interested in this process, I would recommend watching a documentary called Rotten and looking at their segment or their specific episode on dairy. It's very fascinating. It's really about everything that I'm speaking about, but in a 45-minute segment. And because it's based in America, where some states allow raw dairy and some states don't, it gives this really interesting perspective of the evolution of pasteurization and dairy and the pros and cons and whatnot. When I get pregnant, I get really breathless, mainly because there's like bubba, taken up home in there. So, excuse my breathlessness. But Rotten, the documentary, very, very, very fascinating. I think you can access it on Netflix in Australia. So check that out if you want to more details on it. But essentially, that's a brief rundown of the history of it. So some countries it's not, you don't have to pasteurize. Here in Australia, yes, you do. So even cheese needs to be pasteurized. And that's in order to kill off the bugs so we don't get sick. Now, the issue there is, and this is just one of the issues, is that it increases the lactose content. So if you are intolerant to dairy, there are a couple of things that you can be intolerant to. One is the lactose content, so that's a sugar, okay? When you are lactose intolerant, you don't have enough of the enzyme lactase. So any word ending in ase is an enzyme. So you don't have enough lactase to digest the lactose. Now, how that works is, if you remember the game Pac-Man, or I just watched the movie Pixels the other day, Pac-Man is on that movie. Pac-Man goes around and it eats things, right? Enzymes work like that. They go around, so the lactase enzyme goes around and it breaks the lactose down so that you can absorb the nutrients and get the benefits from it. So if you don't have enough Pac-Man or enough lactase enzymes in your body to digest the quantity of dairy that you've consumed, then you can get bloating, nausea, reflux, diarrhea, cramping, pain is quite common. So that's where that comes into play. The other thing you can be intolerant to in dairy is called casein. Now that's a protein. And this comes up a lot in terms of behavioral issues and skin issues. So it's not always the lactose that you can be intolerant to in dairy. That's just the famous one. So getting back to lactose, when dairy is pasteurized, so heated to a really, really high temperature, what happens is that the lactose gets converted into the sugar lactulose, okay? And when that happens, basically the lactulose content of the milk goes up. Done, essentially. Now, how that affects the body is that lactulose, you can actually isolate that lactulose. You can then put it into a pill, or you can't, but the companies can put it into a pill, which is used as a diuretic. So if you're constipated, you can take a lactulose tablet and that will help you to do a poo, okay? So if you're just consuming dairy and you're quite sensitive to it, you don't have enough lactase, that lactulose content can cause diarrhea, okay? If you're sensitive to it. So that's kind of how it works on a chemical level. In some cases, it also increases mucus. So if you get a lot of sinusitis, I don't recommend consuming dairy. And acne. Acne and dairy are highly correlated. So immediately remove that from your diet and you should find a difference within a month. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that not all dairy is created equal. If you choose to consume it, I always recommend going organic grass-fed because there's no hormones or antibiotics or any other crap in there. The type of omega fat content is much better, etc. However, if you choose to consume dairy, you might find that the more liquid the dairy, the more you react. Yeah, so think sour cream, cream, milk, yogurt, all of those are quite liquid. and they have a higher lactose content. Okay, harder forms of dairy like hard cheeses and butter and ghee contain little to no lactose, so you may not react to it. And this is why often I'll pop people on a dairy-free diet, but they can still consume ghee and butter because they contain virtually no lactose, and only in really sensitive cases are they going to react to that. And then again, you've got a question, is it the dairy or is it your gallbladder unable to process the fats? That's where individual consultation comes into play. So I'm going to wrap it up because we're getting on to 10 plus minutes. But comment below your thoughts and any questions you have and what you learned, like what was your wow. I didn't know that. That was really, really cool. So enjoy. I'm Jenna, clinical nutritionist, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.